Hello everyone. Here we'll try to understand the segmental organization of the motor system. The learning objectives would be to understand the organization of motor system at spinal segments, classify muscles physiologically, define upper and lower motor neurons and give their functions, understand the importance of motor unit recruitment, and appreciate the topographical organization of the motor neuron pool and spinal interneurons. Motor system is broadly organized at three levels: spinal cord, brainstem, and forebrain. Integration of motor system at the level of spinal cord is the major component of the regulation of motor functions. In the spinal cord, each segment has its own neural circuitry for motor control. This is called as segmental organization. Organization of motor control above the spinal cord segment, mainly by brainstem and forebrain area, is called suprasegmental organization. Components of this organization. Each segment of spinal cord has its input and output connections with various muscles. From muscles, input reaches spinal cord via muscle, that is afferents. It could be through 1A, 1B or other afferents. From spinal cord, output reaches muscles via motor neurons. In the spinal cord, between afferent neurons and motor neurons are mini interneurons. In addition to the inputs from afferents, interneurons, and motor neurons are the targets of descending fibers from various suprasegmental centers. Organization of neuronal connections at every spinal cord segment is a unit of segmental organization. Segmental organization includes muscles, afferent neurons, motor neuron pool, and spinal neurons. So this is the diagram of one segmental organization. So which segment includes uh, muscles, which are the receptors, as well as the effectors, the joints and other somatic structures, the afferents, the interneuron pool and motor neuron pool of that particular segment, and the motor neurons of that particular segment. This is the another diagram of one segmentation, so which includes the different receptors uh, and the spinal neuron of that particular segment, the afferent as well as efferent pathways, then the muscles which are involved in that segment. Muscles, according to their functions and anatomical position, muscles are classified into various groups. Usually they are categorized as flexors, extensors, abductors, adductors, pronators, supinators, depending on the movement of the body parts they perform. Physiologically, most important muscles are classified as flexors and extensors. Extensor group of muscles is especially important for maintenance of posture, and flexor group of muscles for withdrawal reflexes. By definition, extensors are the muscles that increase the angle at the joint, and flexors are muscles that decrease the angle at the joint. Extensors of the lower limb resist gravity and therefore uh, the main anti-gravity muscles. The tone of the anti-gravity muscle is important for maintaining posture. According to the electrochemical properties and ability to sustain exercise, muscles are classified into fast twitch, fatigue resistant, slow twitch, fatigue resistant, fast twitch, fatigable, and slow twitch, fatigable types. However, from neurophysiological point of view, the muscles are best classified as medial, lateral, or proximal distal groups. Medial or proximal group of muscles. The medial or proximal group of muscles include axial and girdle muscles and proximal limb muscles. Axial muscles are muscles attached to the axial skeletons and girdles of the body. These muscles are involved in postural adjustments such as, as they produce body and whole limb movements. The medial extensors perform anti-gravity functions and therefore are important for control of posture. Lateral or distal group of muscles. The lateral or distal muscles include intrinsic muscles of the digits and the distal muscles of the extremities. These muscles subserve the manipulatory activities, that is, skilled voluntary movements. Thus, to summarize, proximal group of muscles control posture and distal group of muscle control skilled voluntary activities. In fact, for understanding motor physiology, the whole nervous system is divided into medial. So, in fact, understanding the motor physiology, the whole nervous system is divided into medial or lateral uh, distinctions. The afferents of segmental motor system. The main afferent fibers for the motor activities are one A afferents that arise from the muscle spindles, and type 2 and 1B afferents also play a role in the motor control. Flexor reflex afferents mediate withdrawal reflexes. Motor neurons. The motor neurons, also called as motor neurons, uh, that are involved in the control of motor functions. They are broadly divided into two categories: upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons. Upper motor neurons are neurons that are derived from various motor areas of the brain, like motor cortex, brainstem, motor nuclei, and terminate directly or indirectly via interneurons on the lower motor neurons in the spinal cord. Axons of these neurons form the descending pathways. Some of the important examples of these pathways are corticospinal, rubrospinal, vestibulospinal, and reticulospinal tracts. Lower motor neurons originate in the anterior horn of the spinal cord or in the cranial motor nuclei and innervate various skeletal muscles. The cell bodies of motor neurons are located in the ventral horns of the spinal gray matter, that is, anterior horn cells, and brainstem nuclei. Though some of the fibers in the descending pathways terminate directly on the motor neurons, most of the fibers terminate on interneurons, which in turn project to the motor neurons. There are two types of lower motor neurons, that is, alpha motor neurons and gamma motor neurons. So this diagram shows the division of upper motor neuron and the lower motor neuron. Upper motor neuron, they arise from the brain and they descend up to the spinal cord to the anterior horn cells. Okay. From there arises the lower motor neurons, which are going to innervate the target uh, ends, that are muscles. So as we discussed, there are two types of motor neurons, alpha and gamma motor neurons. The alpha motor neurons constitute the final common path of motor output signals from CNS, the route by which the central neural activities influences the skeletal muscles. The alpha motor neurons innervate extrafusal fibers, which are responsible for force generation. One alpha motor neuron innervates 10 to 1000 muscle fibers depending on the muscle. A motor unit constitutes a motor neuron, its axon, and the branches of axon, the neuromuscular junctions at the distal end of each axon branch, and all the extrafusal muscle fibers innervated by that motor neuron. When a motor neuron generates an action potential, all of its muscle fibers are activated. Physiological significance. According to their cell body size and axon diameter, alpha motor neurons are divided into two types: the larger and smaller motor neurons. The larger motor neurons have fast conduction velocities and are active in high effort force generation. They innervate fast twitch, high force but fatigable muscle fibers. The smaller motor neurons have lower thresholds to synaptic stimulation, have a slower conduction velocity, and innervate slow twitch, low force, and fatigue resistant muscle fibers. Thus, all muscle fibers of a motor unit belong to one category, that is, either they are fast twitch or slow twitch type. So, this property of homogeneity of motor unit is decided by the type of motor neuron. Following denervation, the muscle fiber may change if the muscle fiber is reinnervated by an axon sprouted from another type of motor neuron. Gamma motor neurons. The gamma motor neurons innervate the intrafusal fibers that are fibers of the muscle spindle. They constitute around 30% of the fibers arising from anterior horn cells. They do not contribute to the total force generated in the muscle, rather, they modulate the sensitivity of muscle spindle and thereby regulate muscle length and muscle tone. The gamma motor neurons with intrafusal fibers constitutes fusing motor system. The gamma motor neurons do not receive inputs from sensory afferents. Rather, descending pathways influence them. Thus, supraspinal motor centers regulate muscle tone mainly by altering the discharge of gamma motor neurons. So, this diagram showing one motor unit, the single spinal nerve, which is going to innervate the different muscle fibers. Then motor neuron pool. Spinal motor neuron pool are the common path for central motor outputs. The cell bodies of motor neurons located in the ventral horn of the spinal cord, which are known as anterior horn cells. The anterior horn cells constitutes the motor neuron pools. Topographical organization. There is a topographical organization of motor neurons in the spinal cord with regard to the target muscles they innervate. Accordingly, motor neuron pool is divided into two parts, the medial group and lateral group. The medial group of anterior horn cells innervate the axial and proximal muscles, and lateral group of anterior horn cells innervate the distal muscles. Thus, medial group of anterior horn cells control posture, whereas lateral group of anterior horn cells control skilled voluntary movements. Consequently, the lateral motor neuron pool is enlarged to occupy about 70% of the ventral horn in the lower cervical and upper thoracic spinal cord segments. So that is called as brachial enlargement, as these segments supply the intrinsic muscles of hand and that are involved in manipulatory activities. Low down in the spinal cord, the ventral horn, the motor neuron pool is devoted to the medial group cells as successively more proximal limb muscles are innervated by them. It is important to remember the inputs that preferentially project to the more medial motor neuronal cell group primarily control posture, and inputs that distribute to the lateral motor neuronal cell group principally control skilled activities. The spinal interneurons. Interneurons in the spinal cord are placed between dorsal and ventral horns. The interneurons that concern mainly in the motor functions are placed more towards the ventral horn, and the interneurons concerned with sensory functions are placed more towards dorsal horn. Most of the descending influences on the motor neurons are extended indirectly via interneurons rather than their direct projection to the spinal motor neurons. Thus, interneurons are major targets of descending tracts. Topographical organization. Like motor neuronal cell groups, the interneuronal cell groups are arranged topographically in the spinal cord. The interneurons are divided into two cell groups, ventromedial interneuronal cell group and dorsolateral interneuronal cell group. The ventromedially situated interneurons project preferentially to the medial group of motor neurons, and dorsolaterally placed interneurons project to the lateral group of motor neurons. Consequently, the ventromedial interneuronal cell group is primarily involved in the controlling posture, and dorsolateral interneuronal cell group is regulating skilled voluntary activities. So, this is the topographical organization of the interneurons, and motor neuronal pool. So arrows indicate that projection of interneuronal group to the motor neuronal group. Okay, so these are the situation of where the interneurons are situated, and and these are the area where the anterior horn cells are present, so which are going to go to the distal group of muscles, and so these groups they are going to go to the axial and proximal group of muscles. So this is in brief about the segmental organization of the spinal cord. Thank you.